So Craig Johnson is the New York Times best-selling author of the Longmire Mysteries, the basis for the hit Netflix original series Longmire. He's the recipient of the Western Writers of America Spur Award for Fiction. Twice. Woo! And maybe tomorrow 3 times?
Well, no, tomorrow will be the Saturday night, I get the second Spur, which is really good because I've only had one Spur Award for like about 16 years now, and my horse is really tired of going to the Spur. So, move on out as of Sunday.
Finally balance out that poor horse.
Sorry, I bring that
lost 5 place, haven't I? He's also won the Mountains and Plains Booksellers Award for Fiction. Any joke about that?
Couple of them. I think I won 2 of those too.
Jesus. Slow down.
Been around for a while.
The new, I'm not going to say this, is all fancy French. The Nouvel Observateur Prix des Romans Noirs.
Not bad at all.
Which I'm guessing means like the new something prize for a noir novel. Right?
He was doing so well. But you always try and go a little further than you should.
I know, right? I never know when I never do. Ask anyone who knows it. And apparently the French love him because he also got the Prix SNCF du Polar. Do you
know what it is? It's the train. It's the train. SNCF is the big train system for the French. Like, and every year they pick the best mystery of the year, and by golly, like they picked one of mine. Which one? Right, because it was like in all the trains. You know, I mean, you would go and get a cheese stick or something like that, or a glass of wine from the little commissary on the trains, and there my book was. Like
which one? Which book was it?
It was Another Man's Moccasins, the other Vietnam book. Yeah, which was really kind of weird.
Yeah.
You know, I'll take them.
As a traveler,
you hand me those. I just take them.
That's the best prize I can imagine, winning one from a train.
I know. I know. I would have thought it would have been like
Burlington Northern wants to give me a prize, I am all in. That'd be amazing. And this is almost over. His novella Spirit of Steamboat was the first one-book Wyoming selection. He lives in Ucross, Wyoming. Population, has it changed? Is it still 26?
26.
Population 26.
We've gone up 1 person in 40 years. And it caused a major uproar because there were no babies. Nobody moved in. And so we're still trying to figure out where that 26th person came from. And I cornered Mark Gordon about it, and I said, so if you have enough of an uptick in enough municipalities, do you get more federal money? He was like, I can't talk about that, Craig. And I was like, okay. Now we know. And so then I just want to, I'm just going to read this very brief thing. This is from my review of this last book from Big Sky Journal. Which is a fabulous, fabulous review. I just posted it today. Oh, thank you. And you know, when I write reviews for this magazine, they tell me you only have to review the books you like. If you don't like the book, don't review it, right? So you know, anytime I have a review in Big Sky Journal, I really mean it. Because if I didn't like it, I just would pretend I didn't see it, right? And so this is all so incredibly true. With Longmire, Johnson continues to spin compelling and exciting tales of mystery and the dark sides of humanity. But it is his passion for social justice and honoring the struggles of the downtrodden that elevates his books beyond the ordinary heap of genre fiction. Whether the horrors of Indian boarding schools, victims of corporate malfeasance, the epidemic of missing and murdered indigenous women, and now, with this new book, the unconstitutional and unconscionable crimes committed by our government against Asian Americans in World War II. The novels in the Sheriff Longmire series grapple with important issues that leave the reader better informed, more compassionate, and, one hopes, moved to action, all the while never slipping into a hint of didacticism, I can't say that word, I can write it, that would remove the reader from the spellbinding and heart-racing story that unfolds with a superb mastery of craft.
Whoa.
And with those words and with a proper toast, thank you for being here, and please welcome our friend Craig Johnson.
Grab a Rainier, they're back there, you know. Those are the bottles too, so it's the good stuff, you know, just so you know. All right, the beer story. Here it is. I got a call from Lou Doman Phillips, he said, hey, you know, he said, I won the Western Heritage Award from the National Cowboy Hall of Fame. Can you come down here to Oklahoma City? He said, I gotta have somebody who will do the introduction for me and then do the interview afterwards. And I said, yeah, happy to. I'll come down and do it. So I go down there, and the guy that I'm doing it with, they had a rehearsal for us to make sure we didn't mess it up. And so the guy I'm doing it with is a fellow you haven't heard of, maybe by the name of Wyatt McCrae, but you know his grandfather, Joel McCrae, a killed actor. And did a lot of westerns. It was a really good cowboy actor. But anyway, as a matter of fact, sometimes when people would ask me, who should play Walt Longmire, Joel McCrae was one of the ones that I said. So anyway, we're doing this rehearsal, and it's in this great big huge ballroom, and it's empty. It's like about 1,000-person ballroom, and it's empty. And they're telling us all this stuff to not do and what to do and all this. One of the first things they tell you is don't look up at the Jumbotron, because they've got this big screen up back there, and you're on the Jumbotron, right? And they tell you don't look at it because it'll mess you up. And I was like, yeah, it's not going to mess me up. It'll mess you up is what it'll do. Because the problem is when you look up and see yourself, and your nostril is as big as like a beach ball, and you look up and you see it, and you're like, oh, I need a little trim, don't I? But anyway, we were going through it and everything, and then we're walking to where they want us to walk. We're handing the trophy over to when we're supposed to hand the trophy over to Lou, and then we're walking back away, and then we walk back over to the podium, do our little thing, look at it, and then we finish up, and then we all go off on the back. So we did it one time, one shot. We had it. We're getting ready to leave, and I told Wyatt, I said, let's go through the house and go on ahead, and cut through the lobby back to the hotel because it's a shorter trip. He goes, yeah, let's do that. And so we go down the steps as we're coming through the house. Right there, dead center front, there's a big, big table with about 24 seats around it, for goodness sake. And there's this guy, he's tall, real dressed in the nines cowboy, has this Million X white, bone white, hat on, and everything like that. And he's checking the name plates at each one of the place settings. Checking them out as he goes around the table. And as I walk by him, he looks over at me and goes, Craig Johnson. And I look over at him and go, yes, sir. And he goes, Walt Longmire. And I say, yes, sir. And then he makes this face and he goes, Rainier. And I was like, I don't know this guy. I'm not going to sit there and argue beer with him for goodness sakes. So I just looked at him and I go, what was it, vitamin R? Went on ahead up the aisle there, went on ahead out. And so I pushed the door open, I go into the lobby, and Wyatt McCrae is right behind me, and he's bent over half laughing. He can't even breathe. And I turn around and look at him and I go, what? And he goes, you don't know who that was, do you? And I said, no, I don't. He goes, that was Pete Coors. I'm going to get that sponsorship anytime soon. Anyway, it's wonderful to be here. That was your warm-up story. But yeah, this is the 20th book in the Walt Longmire series, which sounds really strange coming out of my mouth because it never was supposed to be a series. It was just going to be a standalone book. That was all it was. When you read The Cold Dish, it's got a beginning, middle, and an end. And what happened was, Kathleen Court was the president of Penguin USA and one of the senior editors at Viking. And she was my editor. I got assigned to her, which was really kind of spectacular. And I remember, talking with her in one of the meetings I had there in New York when they were still getting ready to publish The Cold Dish. And she said, we really like this book. We really like this book. And I said, I'm really glad since you guys are publishing it, because if you didn't really like it probably wouldn't work out. And she said, no, I don't think you understand. She said, we really like these characters. We really like this place. And I said, well, good. Like that. She goes, we think what you have here is a series. We think that people are going to want more of these characters and of this place. And we think you should seriously consider the possibility of maybe doing this as a continuation, do more of these books with these same characters. And that's when I, with the knowledge of not even having had one book published, started arguing with the president of Penguin USA. Yeah, and I don't think that's a good idea, but I got some other ideas I'm going to bounce off you guys, see what you think about it. And she was like, why don't you go back to your ranch in Wyoming and think about this? So I did. We went home, and so one of the things I might not have mentioned is that the first draft of the cold dish was like 650 pages long. Yeah, it was like War and Peace in Absaroka County. And I think it was important because it's good for me, because I think I made the mistake I think a lot of beginning authors make. What you do is you think, I am only going to fool them into publishing one book, so I am putting everything in this book. And then, you get to the end and they are going to publish it, and you think to yourself, okay, there's a lot of this stuff that's in there that really doesn't have a place in this story, it needs to come out. So I locked like 250 pages out of it before it got published. And Judy, my wife over here in the corner, one thing she said to me was, you lost a lot of backstory, you lost a lot of relations, a lot of subtext, a lot of things just went away like that whenever you took that out. She said, if those things are ever going to see the light of day, you're going to have to think about going back in and writing some more of these. And so I thought, all right, okay, I can't have the largest publisher in the world and my wife mad at me all the time. So I called Viking Penguin and get Catherine on the phone, and I said, okay, let's make a deal. The deal is this: I'll write 3 more of these so that there'll be 4 books, in total. Because I thought I don't want to commit to writing forever, because I didn't know if it was going to work. I hadn't even written a second book, so I didn't even know if I could. And so I said, I'll do 4 in total. And she says, great, that sounds fantastic. We'll be happy to get, as many as we can get. And then there was a long pause. And she goes, but I do have to ask. And I said, why 4? And she goes, yeah. And I said, well, it seems to me that if you're going to do this type of thing, you need to have a framework to work with that will provide, a different, environment for each book. And I said, you know what? The thing that has the biggest effect on us here in the Northern Rockies has got to be the weather, right? And so I thought, what I'll do is I'm going to do a Vivaldi is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do the 4 seasons. And because, as we know here on the High Plains, January ain't nothing like July. And so I thought that'll give me completely different, environments for each book. And so we went with it, and everything was great. And I'd had some benefits that I hadn't really counted on. Some that I did, some that I didn't. The first one was it provided a continuity, is what it did. Bless you. In the sense that the books are can only be maybe about 3 or 4 months apart. So if Walt breaks a finger or something, he's going to be wearing a splint in the next book or something like that. So, and I really like that because whenever I would find a series of books that I really enjoyed, they would skip a year or 2, and I would be always saying, well, what happened in that year or 2 to the characters? If I'm interested in them, I want to know what happened in that period of time too. So the continuity was kind of nice. And then there was this one incredible benefit that happened by accident. This is the 20th Walt Longmire book. Walt Longmire is only 5 years older than when we first met him. We have gone through 20 years of what we refer to at the ranch as Walt years. So Walt is only all the shit that's happened to him in the last 20 years happened in 5 years. So everybody's always kind of beat up on Walt. I'm like, you don't have any idea. For God's sakes. But anyway, yeah, he's only 5 years old. Me, I'm 20 years older than when we first started. So at some point in time, I'm going to be older than Walt. I don't know if I like that idea. But yeah, and so it really kind of worked out, really kind of well. And in that 4-book season, in that one first year of Walt's literary life, I started taking some chances because when I got that first contract for the cold dish from Viking Penguin, all it said was, it must be a mystery and have Walt Longmire in it. That was it. That's all it said. And I was like, oh, I can get into a lot of trouble with this. I go in a lot of directions and do a lot of different things. And then the other thing was, that one part that I did not take into consideration was, at the time when I started doing these books, everything in crime fiction was noir. It was all like, alcoholic divorce detectives burying bodies in their backyards, and all this. And I thought, well, what if I did something with the sheriff of the least populated county in the least populated state? That would be something completely different, right? Yeah, genius, right? How many people can you kill in that county before it gets really stupid? And so I thought, I'm going to do something a little different here now, right? I guess, right? I'm doing like a ball team is what I'll do. I'll do home and away. Because if Walt's got that much of a reputation and he's that good at what he does, I thought, well, he's going to get at least 23 other sheriffs in Wyoming that have got like all these cold cases that say, hey, we could use some help on these. And so I started doing Walt and Away. And the third book in the series, Kindness Goes Unpunished, takes place, in Philadelphia, for goodness sake. And the reason I did that one was because, Westerners in the context of the West are one thing, but Westerners in the context of a big city in the Northeast, I thought that would be something interesting to do. And I'm always looking for something that's going to make the books completely different than anything I've done before. And then the fourth book, I really went hog wild. And not only I took Walt all the way around the planet, all the way to Vietnam, right? And then I took him back in time to 1968. So it was the first homicide investigation for him as a Marine investigator. Well, 68 was the first year that the Marine Corps actually started having their own detectives and investigators. Up to that point, basically what they were muscle for the NCIS guys. It was naval investigators, but then they started having their own. And so that was kind of fun to kind of like probe that and see how to do that and be accurate with it too. And I had a blast doing that. And then the next one was that I went back in time, for was Western Star, which is the one where I was talking to one of the old sheriffs in Wyoming, and I do a lot of like sheriff events. I do like the Wyoming Sheriff's Association, Western Sheriff's Association, the National Sheriff's Association, all those. And I was doing one, I think it was the Western Sheriff's Association, and I was talking to one of the old sheriffs there, and he said, well, man, it's too bad you weren't here to do this 30 years ago. And I said, well, why is that? And he said, well, the Wyoming Sheriff's Association used to have their annual meeting on a train. And I was like, what? And he goes, yeah, went all the way from Cheyenne, all the way to Rock Springs, Evanston, and then back. And I was like, what was that like? 23 sheriffs on a train? And he goes, oh, hell, Craig, they were all so drunk by the time we got to Rawlins. He said, I didn't even know they were on a train. But all I could think was, man, that is an Agatha Christie homage, if there ever was one. That's the Western Wyoming version of Murder on the Orient Express, right? And it led to the first celebrity cameo. I don't know if I've told this story up here before. I think I might have one time. But it led to the first celebrity cameo that I did in the books. And what it was there's a part in the book where Walt gets thrown off the train. And so he stumbles over to I-80, this truck stop, and there's a bus idling in the truck stop. And so he goes over and, knocks on the bus door, and the bus driver won't open the door. Walt, badges in like that. And he opens the door like that, and he says, you gotta give me a ride up to the next exit so that I can, get a hold of it and get back on that train because somebody killed somebody and I think I know what's going on. And the guy's like, dude, we're like a rock band and we're trying to get, to San Francisco for this gig that we've got, tomorrow night. He said, you can't make any noise, you can't talk, you can't do anything like that stuff because he said, if you wake them up, I'm going to lose my job. And so Walt says, okay, I will not make any noise, I will not talk, I will not do anything. So he lets him get on the bus. He gets on the bus, he sits on the little sofa there with his hands in his lap, not making any noise. Well, of course, moments later, the beaded curtain parts, and this beautiful brunette steps out. She's wearing this 60s muumuu and the beads and everything, and she comes over and sits down next to him, and they start having this really kind of mind-blowing conversation about life and the trajectory that your life takes and where it goes and what you do and the changes that can happen and all these kinds of things. And it was a really important point in the book because I wanted to show that there were, moments in your life where you make a choice. And that's a direct trajectory. You're going in that direction from that point on. And I've had a number of those in my life, and usually there's a woman involved. I don't know what that's about, but anyway, and Judy was one of them. And so anyway, and that one stuck, right? And so anyway, and they're having this wonderful conversation, but then the bus driver pulls up and stops at the exit. He pulls over and stops. And Walt, starts to get out, and she reaches up and takes Walt's hand and says, don't go. Don't go. come to San Francisco with us. We got a big party that we're going to do in the park, big concert. You can do security work, for the band. Come on. And Walt's like, I can't. I've got something I've got to do. Even then, you see, what he was like. And he says, no, I've got to take care of the situation on this train. I have no choice. I have to. And so he steps down off the bus. It's cold out. And she's got this blanket, wrapped around her. And she takes the blanket, wraps it around him, and gives him a kiss. And he takes 2 steps, kind of stumbling a little bit, and turns around and looks at her and says, I don't even know your name. And she says, Grace. And so he says, well, thank you, Grace. And so then he goes and catches on the train, and goes on with his life. I went on a tour for that book, right? And I get back home, and of course there's a mound of mail waiting for us when we get back after being gone for a couple of weeks. And I look, and there's the packages, and there's one that's a shape that I remember from my past. It's flat, square, and I rip it open, it's a record album, and it was the very first Jefferson Airplane album. And I was like, cool, somebody got it. Somebody knew that was. That's great. And I thought, I wonder who it is that sent it. I flip it over, and in black Sharpie, written on the back was a note that said, if Walt Longmire were real, I would have fucked him. Grace Slick. And I was like, there you go. And you don't think that I don't have that framed up on my writing wall anymore. But this one was another one. This was another one that went back in time and into the 60s. Because that was a really interesting period in time. And so what happens is it's 1964 in this particular book. And what I was curious about, I was just curious about what Walt and Henry were like before their military training, before the Vietnam War. What were they like? And so at this point in time, they've graduated, from their respective colleges, universities, and they've lost their deferment, and the draft is looming large at that point in time. And so the question becomes, okay, do we just try and ride it out, or do we go ahead and enlist? And so they decide to go ahead and enlist, which they do. And so they get sent on this epic road trip across the United States in 1964. Well, now, what's the road you take when you drive across the U.S. in 1964? It's got to be Route 66, right? So the big question at that point in time becomes, how far do they get before they get into trouble? Hell, they barely get into Arizona, for goodness sake. This was supposed to be the whole trip. This was supposed to be from Point Malibu all the way to Paris Island, all the way across the country. I only got to Arizona. So now there are going to be 2 more of these coming somewhere down the road. We're going to have one that goes from Arizona to Oklahoma, in the Southern Cheyenne Reservation, of course, Henry's relatives there, and then from Oklahoma, the rest of the way to Paris Island. So might not be the next couple of books, but I'll get them out to you, I promise, at some point in time. Would you guys like to hear a little reading from 1964 here? All right, here we go. Hopefully you'll enjoy this. You're too big to surf, Mom. Looking at the chopped waves rolling in past Point Dune near Malibu as the sun got shouldered out by the grim-looking clouds above the vast Pacific Ocean. I leaned my back against the still warm wall of Marvelous Marv's snack bar and let the heat there relax my sore muscles, a trick that I learned from Henry. What do you know, Marv? You don't surf. Marvelous Marv was a transplant from Jamaica, having given up his island paradise for California coast, and specifically Malibu Point. His snack bar was an on-again, off-again operation in a particularly crumbling structure of cement block on Pirates Cove Beach that everybody was pretty sure that he'd acquired because the previous owner had abandoned it. Truth be told, nobody knew his real name, but Marvelous Marv was painted across the side of the weathered white building in a sweeping turquoise script, so the name had stuck. With dreadlocks and a crocheted hat, he served up cold drinks, chips, ice cream when it wasn't too hot, and from what I was to understand, the finest lamb's breath marijuana ever smoked by man. Personally, I tried the stuff only once, but it got nothing more than a headache and went back to beer. I turned towards the ocean, aware that in the 4 years, it hadn't lost any of its fascination for me. Maybe because when the wind blew across the grasslands and the high plains, the whole world felt alive. And the same could be said about the Pacific. The thing about the ocean was, it was never the same. Whether it was the north swell or the rip curls off the point, it was always different. I guess that over time, I never again saw the sea as an adversary, but rather an intimate companion. Ain't nobody gonna be surfing out there today, man. He turned and raised the volume on the tiny transistor radio behind him, bringing in the throaty voice of Richie Barrett singing Some Other Guy. He looked up at the darkening skies and then at the chop of the waves and the checkered flag that the local meteorologists had placed on the top of a rock cairn out at the point, signaling danger to the many fishing vessels that hugged the coast, rounding the point. Hey, Marv, when was that fishing boat that went down last year? About 9 months ago, man. The Siesta Royale, working boat. She took 8 souls with her. Marvelous crossed himself and stared down at the scaly painted surface of the counter that spanned the only window of the snack bar. Hey, man, why don't you buy a candy bar or something? I got Baby Ruth. Not hungry. He nodded, giving up on the sail and looking out at the sea. Well, that good-looking girl that you hang out with, Rachel? I pointed to 2 fearless individuals who waited on a set not too far out, biding their time in the rising storm to catch just one more maxed-out girl onto the beach. Out there with Henry. Marv shook his head. That bear, man, he crazy. I thought about the celebratory trips to Cheyenne Nation and I'd taken down to Tijuana and how many drunken brawls that we barely escaped with our lives. Sometimes, yeah. How long you been surfing? I thought about when the bear had come down from Berkeley. About a month ago. He finished up early, and to be honest, I think they were happy to get rid of him. He majored in political science, but I think he spent more time in protests and sit-ins than he did in class. Protesting the war? Yeah. But looks like he's going to be a part of it anyway. He nodded. You good on that board. Simple, old-fashioned style, drawing long lines with perfect balance, big man. But that bear, he looked like he'd been surfing his whole life. I sighed. Yeah, he's kind of a natural athlete. Sensing my feelings of inadequacy, Marv threw me a bone. Hey, congratulations on that fruit bowl that you won, man. Rose Bowl. It was a Rose Bowl. Yeah, is that a big deal, man? I guess. You gonna play more of that football? No. Both Henry and I graduated and lost our deferment, so we enlisted. He slid down the heavy sunglasses on his nose and looked at me. Enlisted? Yeah, before we could get drafted. He shoved the glasses up with a middle finger and then looked back out at the threatening ocean, where Rachel and the bear finally caught what looked to be a premium wave as it feathered, the crests throwing spray and swells steepening. They'd had a hard time finding the line, and then suddenly the wave looked much bigger and more frightening. They got that football up in Canada, you know. I nodded, pressing my back harder against the blocks and sliding up to a sitting position so I could watch the two of them better. No, that won't be the direction that we're going. Ah, Mexico. The long period glassy and gray swells lifted them as they stood on their boards. No, Henry's supposed to go to Fort Polk, someplace called Tigerland in Louisiana. And I'm supposed to go to Paris Island in South Carolina for some reason. I watched as a questioning look returned to his face and figured I'd cut him off at the pass. If you're a Marine in the western part of the state, you go to 29 Palms, San Diego way. And if you're in the eastern part of the country, you go to Paris Island in South Carolina. But ain't you a cowboy, man? My 2 closest friends were now silhouettes, backlit by the one glimmer of the gray sun that threw a single shard of mercury light between the closing clouds. Their boards carved like dark blades, slashing and gliding beneath their balanced feet as Rachel effortlessly cut back behind the bear. I am, but for some reason they want me to report to Paris Island, so we get a road trip ahead of us, starting tomorrow. He shrugged. That should be fun. It was a perfect wave to start the season. A gift sent by the sea gods with the glowing hooks and tall shoulders. A day of glory on Big Wednesday. Yeah, kind of last hurrah. This kind of brings me to the title of the book, which actually comes from a good friend of mine who was the youngest elected Texas sheriff. And we were talking about boots, hats, I can't remember what it was, and he said, I made some remark about when it is you switch over from your palm leaf hat to your wool, fur hat. And he goes, well, all the old timers know that, first frost. And that's kind of what happened. And I remember at the time, I thought to myself, that's a great title. Now I need a book. And so it happened to be this one. Like in this book, generally, what it is Walt and Henry, I mean, they're 22 years old. They've been playing college football for the last 4 years. They're probably in the best physical shape they're ever going to be in their entire lives. The bad news is they're 22 years old, and they're not very smart. So and one of my favorite moments of the book, I think, actually, is when things start to fall apart there in Arizona. When they get to Bone Valley, which is this Japanese internment camp. And in 1964, that was only 20 years after the war. And Walt turns to Henry and says, "We should report this to the authorities." And Henry looks back at him and says, "When has that ever worked out for us?" And so anyway, I have to tell you, and of course, this is this beautiful scene here, with the ocean, and the point and the rocks and the storm coming in, but they're getting that one last ride in. And of course, once again, things can't go easy. That's in crime fiction, right? So what happens is there's actually a boat out on the point that comes in just as the storm hits and pushes the boat up against the rocks, and breaks the hull. And so these guys are diving off of the boat, because the boat is sinking. And Walt and Henry grab their surfboards and launch them into the surf in this storm and go out and start pulling these guys and throwing them over the surfboards to bring them down out of the water. By the time they get done, they're bringing in dead bodies, is what they're doing. These guys have already drowned. And the other problem is that contraband is now coming out of the hull of this boat in sealed plastic bags. And so by the time they get that last trip back into the beach, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department is waiting for them. As Walt's choking up salt water, the Los Angeles County Sheriff looks at him and says, "Did you guys come off that boat?" And Walt says, "No, sir, these are our surfboards. We were the ones going out and bringing the guys back in, trying to save them." And he goes, "Did you know? Did you guys know that boat?" And Walt says, "No, sir." And he says, "Did you know any of these guys that you saved?" And Walt says, "No, sir." And he says, "You'll excuse me if I find this a little bit hard to believe. Why in the world would you do something like that?" And Walt just looks at him and says, "Because it was the right thing to do." And right even then, at the ripe old age of 22, we get a little glimmer of who Walt Longmire is and what it is that he's going to become. And then I have to be honest and be fair with you. I can tell you that I stole that scene. I stole that scene from, this is a name you guys may have heard before, Duke Kahanamoku. Heard that name before? Minor royalty in Hawaii, the one that introduced surfing to the mainstream. He's the one that did it, for goodness sake. And there was an instance where he was in Los Angeles, in Redondo Beach, and he was training with a buddy of his for the 1936 Olympics. That was the Hitler Olympics, okay? And so they were training out there on Redondo Beach, and this boat came around the corner on the point there and hit the rocks, it started to go down. And he and his buddy, he swam out with their surfboards and got these, 4 or 5 times, and brought these guys back in and saved their lives. The thing I might not have mentioned is the guy that he was, out there training with, who also went to the Olympics that year, was a fellow by the name of Johnny Weissmuller. Ring a bell? Tarzan. He was the one that played Tarzan in all those movies, right? And the reason I'm telling you this, I had this one story that I stumbled onto about the two of them, that I desperately tried to fit into the book and couldn't get in there. And what happened was they were actually doing these promotional things, because they had to drum up, they had to make all the money themselves, to be able to go to Berlin and be in that Olympics. By the way, they did go and they kicked the shit out of the Nazis. And so anyway, they were gathering money, and they were going all up and down the Americas, North America, Central America, South America, for the Americans. And they were trying to get enough money to be able to make this trip. And there was an instance where they were in Central America, and they had to go from this one town to this other town over the mountains, right? And so they started off in this Jeep, and they didn't even have anybody with them. It was just Johnny Weissmuller and Duke Kahanamoku, and they're going up on this Jeep up over the mountains. And they turn around a corner, and all of a sudden there's these guys all standing in the middle of the road. And they've got automatic weapons and pistols and hand grenades and all this kind of stuff. There was a revolution going on in the country. They didn't even know that it was happening, right? And so these guys start brandishing the weapons and screaming and yelling at them and all this stuff and they don't speak any Spanish. These guys don't speak any English, and they sure as hell didn't speak any Hawaiian, and so they couldn't communicate or anything. But these guys are getting more and more aggressive, and so they're really screaming and yelling, pointing their rifles at them. And finally, Duke Kahanamoku turns around and looks at Johnny Weissmuller, and he says, "I know we don't speak the language," he says, "but they're about to drag us over in this ditch and kill us. So if you've got any way of you can think of telling them who we are or what we are," he said, "you better do it right now." And Johnny Weissmuller throws his head back and goes, "Oh!" I've done that since I was 7. Probably a reason for that. But anyway, yeah, I'm dying trying to get that in the book. Like, and all the revolutionaries looked at him and go, "Tarzan!" So they got out of it. Man, I wanted to put that in the book, and I couldn't get it in there. So, anyway, at this point, normally what I do is open it up and let you guys ask some questions. Please, let's move on from that Tarzan yell. Anybody got anything you'd like to ask? Anything at all? You can ask me anything at all, so I'm open. You guys are kind of quiet.
Well, how good's your internet? If you do so much research, the whole internment thing, our internet here isn't like super great. And if somebody were writing a book and wanting to get a detail, yours is pretty good.
It actually is. Like, you know what? Our internet electricity all comes from like the Powder River Co-op. And we had micro optic lines before the bigger towns did out there, because we're small, really kind of mobile, and they end up, we get a profit, check from them, every year, for goodness sake. And so, yeah, the internet actually at the ranch is not bad. In a town of 25, 26, go figure. Yeah, not bad at all.
Could you be flying all over?
Yeah. It doesn't slow me down too much, I have to admit. So go figure. So, yes, ma'am.
Did you have some say into picking the stars to do the characters, or how that came about?
Yeah, way too much. Yeah, way too much. Okay, I'll give you the Reader's Digest version about that story. They asked me, they said, what do you ever think about actors to play Walt Longmire? And I said, no. I've got friends and family, people I work with, those are all the people that I use for characters. And they said, well, if you were, to think about, actors to play Walt Longmire, and I was like, I'm not going to be any help to you guys, because I just don't watch that much TV. I don't see that many movies. And I'm just not going to be much help to you guys. And so I thought I dodged a bullet, right? And so, we went back home, and I can't remember, like a week later, maybe 2 weeks later, maybe like a month later. We're still in conversation with the producers and everything, and all of a sudden it was like 8 o'clock at night on a Tuesday or a Thursday or something, and the FedEx guy comes up the ranch road. Which is outrageous. Makes me laugh to think about it. It's outrageous. He never comes that late at night, not on a weekday. And so anyway, he comes up the drive and pulls up, and he climbs out, and he's got a box, and he shakes it, and he goes, "Craig, it's an overnight box from Warner Brothers." And he's shaking it, and he's like, "I think it's like DVD." And I'm like, "Yeah, Randy, I don't think you're supposed to do that." So I walk over, and he hands it to me, and he says, "What do you think this is?" I said, "I don't know. He's gonna figure it out." I start to turn around and go in the house. He starts to follow me. "I got this. Okay. Let's stop by tomorrow and find out what it is." I'm like, "Sure, be back. No problem." So I go inside, and I rip open the box. Judy's sitting there at the kitchen table. And I rip open the box, and 30 DVDs fall out, on the table. And it's all the DVDs for the different actors they were thinking about for Walt Longmire. And it was, they had 2 ways they could do it. They could either go with somebody who was a big name that would draw an audience, to the show, or, they could go with somebody who was a relative unknown. And there were good and bad things about both of those. In the first sense, if you go with a big name, you know as well as I do that, if you have a character that wears one of these, there are about 6 guys that get that role over and over and over again. So I was kind of rooting for the unknown guy, right? Well, the problem with that, of course, is that, Walt is at a certain age, okay? So any actor who's going to play Walt's going to have to be, 50, 60 years old at least, right? Well, the problem with being an actor in Hollywood and being in your 50s or 60s and still being unknown,
not a good thing.
you might suck, and that's really kind of a worrisome thing, for those big studios. And so I was still rooting for the unknown guy, but I started putting the DVDs in, and we're tempted to figure out, who's going to be Walt Longmire. We're watching all these guys, some of them big names, some of them people I'd never seen before in my life, and we're watching all these guys, and none of them are really kind of clicking for me. And I get to the very last one. I'm pretty sure that's the way that they planned it, putting it on the bottom. And when I got to the last one, it's Robert Taylor. So I put the DVD in the DVD player, And in the audition, it's actually in the pilot episode, it's the one where Walt goes to Wheatland to do the notification of death. And in law enforcement, it's like the worst job in the world. Because basically what you're doing is going to a stranger's home and telling them that they're never going to see their loved one again alive. It's just the worst. And, Walt did not know this woman. Walt had never been in her home. And Robert Taylor was the only actor that did this. Took off his hat. And I was like, that's our guy right there. We don't have to start from scratch. His mom did a pretty good job getting us started. So I'm feeling pretty good about Robert Taylor. And it was about then that my wife sitting behind me went, oh my.
Nice.
And I turn around, I look at her, and she goes, he's handsome.
Yeah.
Then she made it worse. She's like, you know what? He's kind of like a TV version of you, taller, better looking. I'm not as big of a fan of Robert Taylor as I used to be, I guess.
So how did you do Lou Diamond Phillips? Because
You know what?
Sandy Bear is really big.
You know what? And Lou's like my size. He's like a little over 6 feet, about close to like 200 pounds. So he's not little. It's just that Walt, Robert is a moose. So he looks small compared to him. Like if you look, one of my favorite things is like to give you a hard time about it like that because when he was in all those Young Gun movies,
Oh, yes.
he was they always had him standing on a hill, and poor Lou would be down on the hill lower, so all those short guys would look taller, or they'd have him in a hole, in the back, or something like this. And so he's kind of sensitive about that, like that, because he's not small at all. But the thing is that the big thing is if somebody comes in who is really good, then they're going to go with them. If they slightly differ from the physicality that you have for the character, they're going to go with that person because they're really, really good. And he is a marvelous, marvelous actor. One quick story about him, we actually were down there filming on the first day. And one thing was he actually, when he heard about the show, ran out, because he reads. That's interesting. He's an actor that reads. And he went out and he bought like the first 3 books in the series and read them all over the weekend and came in and did the audition on Monday morning. And so his knowledge of the character, was as much as the producers and the director, right? And we were there the first day. They were filming the pilot episode, and it was in the Red Pony Bar and Grill, and the phone rings. And I'd read the script, Lou goes over and picks up the phone, like that, and he was supposed to just say hello, or something like Red Pony Bar and Grill or something like this. And he picks up the phone and says, it's another beautiful day here at the Red Pony Bar and Grill because you'll swallow red. And then continues on, with the scene, like that, And he finishes the scene all up, and Chris Chulak, who was the director, goes, that ad-lib that you did with the phone, keep that. And I remember Lou turning to me and going, I will.
But it's fantastic how the two of them, the connection that grew or...
Well, and that had to be there, just simply because it was in the books, all the way from book 1. I mean, that key element of the friendship between those two individuals from such varied backgrounds and cultures was really kind of the glue that was going to hold the whole book together. I mean, in that first book, and I don't think I'm giving... Is anybody here that hasn't read The Cold Dish?
Yep.
All right. Well, you should have by now. Anyway, actually, because as you go along in the book, what happens is this young girl with fetal alcohol syndrome, Northern Cheyenne, she, has been raped by these 4 young men. Somebody starts killing them once, all of them, with a 45-70 Sharps buffalo rifle. And as you go along in the book, it keeps looking more and more like Henry is the one that might have done this. And that's the tragedy of it all, because you have this friendship between these 2 men that they grew up together, they went to school together, they went to war together, they came back. They're both responsible for elevating the cultures and societies they live in, and yet they're going to come at each other over this is what's going to do it. It's kind of heartbreaking. I literally had friends of mine who I gave a rough draft of The Cold Dish to, who called me up in the middle of the night and said, if Henry did it, fuck you, I'm not reading it. Keep reading, I don't know, I can't answer that question, So I think, that's a key element, that friendship had to hold all the way through, all the books, all the way through.
And it came through.
And it's a core, it's like a proton, or an atom of some sort, because those 2 cycling, elements are there. But then there's also that element of all of the female characters that are all the way around. Because when the book starts, I made a kind of a calculated, error. in the sense that, you know, not too many people start out their series of books with a, you know, chronically depressed protagonist. Because the problem with that is that you could get up with a really chronically depressing book. Is what anyway, and so, you know, I needed like to, you know, to elevate it a little bit past that. And then so if Walt is at the center of the books and he's damaged goods, he's got this, what I'd refer to as a pride of lionesses who are all the way around him. You know, you've got Ruby, who's responsible for the scheduling of his day-to-day life, where he wouldn't know what to do with himself without those post-its, you know, on the door facing, right? And then he's got, you know, Dorothy down over the hill, who, you know, runs the Busy Bee Cafe to keep him fed, because if he was left to his own devices, they would run out of chicken pot pies for the weekend, and he would starve to death. Like, then he's got his daughter, who is that last emotional tie that he has with his wife being gone. And, you know, without her, you know, there's no life preserver at all. And so she's the emotional tie there. Then you've got Vic, who's right there. And she's going to be with him, you know, whatever he's doing. You know, the undersheriff's going to be right there with him, dealing with all those same situations. And so, woe be unto, you know, anybody that tries to get past that pack of lionesses. You know, so he's in good shape. We don't have to worry about him too much. You had your hand up. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so can you talk a little bit how you started writing and what's your background?
You know, I came from a family of storytellers, and my mother was the best storyteller, and still is the best storyteller I ever heard. She was fantastic, and I was not very good with it. And so I thought to myself, okay, if I can't tell them, you know, maybe I could try writing them instead. And so that's when the bug, you know, finally hit me. But wanting to be a writer is kind of like wanting to be an astronaut. You know, the odds against you are so great. God, don't tell anybody. Well, it's not embarrassing if you don't make it. I mean, and then if you do, like it's like a miracle overnight. You know, you got a success. Like, and so I kind of kept it to myself. Like I got a couple of degrees, like a couple of writing degrees, but you know, the element is you always have to find the voice. You have to find what's the voice that you're going to use to tell the story, and what stories are you going to tell. You know, and the only way you can find that, I think, is to write. You just have to write. I mean, there are a few things in life that the more you do, you know, almost everything in the world, the more you do it, the better you get at it, except for drywall. If you can't do drywall, hire somebody. But, you know, you just, you know, and then that was what happened to me. You know, I tried, you know, working at it, and then life kind of interrupted. Like, you know, I built a ranch myself, because I, you know, had a father and an uncle who had construction companies, and we were all slave labor, you know, until, you know, we escaped, you know, with our lives. And so, you know, I built the ranch myself. Like, I poured the concrete, stacked the logs, did all of it, and then that's when I got really, really serious about it and thought, okay, now's the time. If you're ever going to do this, now's the time. And that's when Walt, you know, kind of waltzed in and sat down, and he hadn't left yet. So, anybody else? Yes.
What's your connection with law enforcement?
Oh, a bunch, like that. But I mean, the biggest thing for me is all of the ride-alongs, like that, and all the sheriffs that I know, because it is a weird kind of form of law enforcement. You know, I mean, I'm always explaining that when I'm overseas, because I'm always explaining, you know, like not only, you know, if you're a sheriff, not only you're a policeman, but you're also a politician. Like that, you have to go out and get votes, and they're kind of appalled by that. Like that, they're always like, doesn't that lead to a great deal of nepotism? And I'm like, sometimes. Okay, you know, it does. Like that. But the other thing is it makes you, you know, immediately answerable and connected to a community. I mean, I've seen it in action, where people who will never in their lives ever walk into a police office will march right into a sheriff's office and say, hey, my neighbor's building his fence 2 feet over on my property line. You need to get a deputy out there and issue, you know, this, like, to stop him and all this kind of stuff. And the reason is because they've given them the most important thing that they have, their vote. And, you know, that's a responsibility for 4 years you got to live up to. And so that kind of connected it all for me with Walt, you know, that he would be answerable, you know, and communicable, you know, so he wouldn't be driving around with chrome sunglasses, you know, glaring at people and things like that. You know, they'd get mad at you if you did that shit. Okay. Anybody else? You want to hear about the next book?
Yeah.
Next book's in November. Yeah. which is why I'm here in the spring, actually. Did you ask me something about that, too? Like, oh, man, you're a little early, aren't you, Craig? Yeah, what happened was I turned in this one. We got all the, all the stuff done. Oh, thank you. This is a full-service bookstore. When this gets broadcast, I hope all the other bookstores up their game, that's all I can tell you. But and so let's see, what happened was I turned this one in, we got the editorial process all done with it and everything, and then I thought, you know what, I'll turn in this novella. It's another novella, like Spirit of Steamboat and The Highwayman, and it's called Tooth and Claw. Okay, it's from the Tennyson poem, Old Nature, Red Tooth and Claw. And so I finished it up, and I handed it in to him, and I figured, okay, it's for 2025. That's what it's for. And so I handed it in, and then they immediately wrote me back and said, no, we're going to put it out this year. And I said, how are we going to do that? We're 2 months away from the spring pub date. How are you going to do that? And they said, we're going to switch them. And I was like, what? He says, we're going to take, First Frost, and we're going to switch it, to the fall, and we're going to switch it to the spring, and then we're going to have the other one going to be coming out, in the fall. And so then they moved it to, so that's what they did. So now that one will be out in November. And it's, it's kind of interesting like that because, I got started on this novella like 5 years ago. And I wasn't happy with the way that it was going. I thought, man, I'm just not happy with this. There's something wrong. I got to do something about it. So I thought, all right, okay, maybe I got to change this a little bit. And I thought, okay, well, the problem is like it's not doing what you wanted it to do. And I remember why it was that I started this novella off the way that I did. And the reason was, you guys remember Alistair MacLean?
Yeah.
Remember Alistair MacLean? Force 10 from Navarone, Ice Station Zebra, Where Eagles Dare, Right, now, I'm not saying that he was the greatest writer in the world, all right? But he did know how to tell a story, hit the ground running, right? And one of the best reviews I ever heard of his books was, they said, Alistair MacLean hits you with everything and the kitchen sink, and then throws the plumber in on top of it. That's pretty good. That's a pretty good analysis there. I thought, all right, okay. And that's what I decided, okay, that's what I was shooting for in this book. That's what I wanted to do. Anyway, what happens is Walt, after his period in Vietnam, and whenever the provost marshal sticks him on Johnston Atoll, for a couple of months, just to get him out of the way, finally decides he's been tired of sweating for the last couple of years, so he's going to go to the coldest place he can find. He goes to the North Slope of Alaska, up in Prudhomme Bay, and he's doing security work on the oil rigs is what he's doing. Now the problem is, Walt is drinking way too much, and so anyway, Walt's drinking way too much. Okay, and so what happens is Martha, which will become his future wife, dispatches Henry on an intervention, to go up to Alaska and break Walt up from the bottle a little bit. And in these type of books, things can't go right? And so they get to go out. They're stuck there, in the rig, for the first day or two, and then they get an opportunity to go out with a National Geographic national team to go out and do these core samples on the big ice, way out. Okay, and there's a C-130 clamshell, and of course things go wrong. There's a crash, they have to try and survive, and then there's all kinds of skullduggery, and then there's the SS Beishimo, which is the most famous Arctic ghost ship. Look it up, the SS Beishimo, and a man-eating polar bear. What more could you possibly want? I mean, this thing gets the ground running, I gotta tell you. And so whoever it was talking to me earlier, I said, I read this whole book in one sitting, that's not fair. And I'm like, you really ain't gonna like me in November. But anyway, there's that one, and then the next year's book, it's actually coming out, it'll be in the spring, so I'll be back in the spring, it's called Return to Sender, is what it's called. You guys know all of my books all come from newspaper articles. They're always newspaper articles. It keeps Walt grounded, in a reality. I don't ever want to write that book where Walt is on a cruise ship, or Walt is, chasing Al Qaeda in Cook County or something like that. So, and this one I was reading an article a couple months ago, and it was about this woman that had the longest postal route in the contiguous, 48 states. Every day she goes out and drives over 300 miles delivering the mail in Wyoming. She only has 4 stops. That's a joke. Thank goodness you laughed. Like, the rest of you are all like, yeah, we've been to Wyoming. We know what that's like. So, yeah, so anyway, like, you know what, of course, with the nefarious mind of the crime fiction writer, the first thing I thought of was, if she went missing, where in the heck would you look for her, right? And so I thought, that's my story right there. So I call up, this is the great thing about being in Wyoming, I call up the Postal Inspector General for the state of Wyoming. The Postal Inspector General for the entire state of Wyoming. And he answers his phone. He didn't even have a secretary. He just picks up the phone like that, And I started asking him all these questions. Like, yeah, I read your books. Like, yeah. And we started talking. We're talking for like half an hour or so and everything. And I said, when we're finally finishing up, I said, I'm trying to figure out how I can get Walt involved, with this investigation. And he goes, federal crime. And I was like, the abduction of a postal worker is a federal crime. And he goes, no, the mail. That's kind of screwed up, But evidently, and he says, no, that's federal crime. I can get anybody I want. I can get any investigator I want to come in and work on the crime. He said, you know what? I'd get Walt Longmire. And I was like, well, that makes two of us. So that's Return to Center next year. Thank you guys so much.